I can't believe this is the first chowder lecture we've had since March 2020.
Wow.
We had Richard Pickering from the Plymouth Plantation here in March, early March 2020, and later that week we were shut down. So this is the first time we've actually done a chowder lecture, and I've decided to try it mostly because Patricia and Judy were like insisting that we get back to chowder. So here we are, we're trying it. So anyway, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Linda Jenkins, Executive Director of the Pickering Foundation for another 2 months. And on behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Foundation, I want to welcome you all. If you're not already a member here, we invite you to join. We've had one person join already today. Thank you, Wendy. We've got a great season planned, and there are these newsletters right at the end of the table here. And on the back page, there is a way to join. So we hope that you'll consider joining. And first, I want to ask you to pardon the scaffolding outside, but we're so happy that it's up there. You may know that we have received 2 CPA grants over the past 2 years to replace the front facade of the house, along with restorations to our balustrades, windows, and barn. And the work is finally just beginning. So that they will probably be up for the next lecture, maybe 2. And don't forget, speaking of next lecture, don't forget to join us on February. So here we are, we're trying it. So anyway, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Linda Jenkins, Executive Director of the Pickering Foundation for another 2 months. And on behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Foundation, I want to welcome you all. If you're not already a member here, we invite you to join. We've had one person join already today. Thank you, Wendy. We've got a great season planned, and there are these newsletters right at the end of the table here. And on the back page, there is a way to join. So we hope that you'll consider joining. And first, I want to ask you to pardon the scaffolding outside, but we're so happy that it's up there. You may know that we have received 2 CPA grants over the past 2 years to replace the front facade of the house, along with restorations to our balustrades, windows, and barn. And the work is finally just beginning. So that they will probably be up for the next lecture, maybe 2. And don't forget, speaking of next lecture, don't forget to join us on February 11th when Chris Burke, where's Chris? Where is Chris? Right here in the front row, and will take us on a virtual walk with Henry David Thoreau and his Salem friend, John Lewis Russell. Today, we're thrilled to welcome an old friend of the Foundation, Dane Morrison. Dane is a professor of early American history at Salem State University and is the author of several books, including True Yankees, The South Seas and the Discovery of American Identity, Salem, Place, Myth, and Memory, and Hero or Coward, the story of General Fitz John Porter. His latest book and the subject of his talk today is Eastward of Good Hope, which began as a corrective, he's going to make me say this word, a corrective to the long historiography.
You did good.
Of early American encounters beyond the Atlantic Ocean after the Revolution. The breadth of these treatments, traditional and modern, has tended to romanticize adventurous travels to the mysterious Orient during a brilliant era of American achievement. Yet, he says, the genre of early maritime writing, the logs, letters, books, reported accounts, and more from beyond the Cape of Good Hope, reveals a different narrative of fraught encounters, apprehensive contacts, and psychological inversions. His book is an effort to relate something of this different narrative. Questions will be welcome at the close of the lecture, and books will be available for purchase at that time. And Dane has generously offered to give to the Foundation any sales that he makes here today. So buy books. Please join me in welcoming Dane Morrison.
Thank you all for coming today. I want to thank Charlie, Tim, and I want to thank Linda for inviting me to talk with you today about Dangerous Worlds. This is one of my favorite places in which to talk, so it's really a delight to be back here and be with you. It's really nice to be able to be here on a serene, quiet, peaceful afternoon and talk about murder and mayhem and massacres and death and danger. Let's start with something familiar. George Rope's 1806 representation of Crown and Shield Wharf. It's I said it's something we're familiar with as part of a mythology, as part of a set of stories that we have taken in and have become part of our background consciousness of the China trade, a world of teas and silks and spices, porcelains, like the materials, the objects that are in the cabinet out in the foyer. This is a world of stately mansions in Salem and Boston and New York and Philadelphia, bustling wharves. It's a world of prosperity and possibilities. And it's only part of the story. The rest of the story was more daunting. Was more daunting for Americans. And what the book attempts to relate is what it felt like to live in Salem or Beverly or Marblehead and hear about the far side of the world. And most of the stories that they took in were stories of great danger and travail. And we might start with something, I think, apropos here. I have to come around and read that. So, let me see. So if this were 1807, early 1807, late 1806, right? The Salem Gazette, the Portsmouth Herald, and so on, would have been filled with this reports of what happened here. The ship Essex sailed in company with a pirate ship. Night approached, and at last not one of the unfortunate crew were said to behold their country again or the light of another day. At a given signal, the pirates on board fell upon the crew with their knives. The corsair, that is a pirate ship, came alongside, and in a few minutes not an American was left to tell the sad tale of their destruction. The headless body of the captain and mutilated carcass of an Englishman, an English merchant, floated on shore, and being recognized, received the rites of burial in a far distant land. Burial in a far distant land was something that happened with frequency, uncomfortable frequency, and this is what Americans were reading about overseas. The Essex was plundered and burned. Well, this Essex was, of course, not the ill-fated whale ship that Melville wrote about, but the story was as troubling. In some ways, it was weirder, but less threatening to read about a whale stoving a ship. This was too real. This was too close to home, and this was all too common in the American newspapers, in lectures, and in that people gave at Athenaeum. But also, these were people you knew. They might have been close relatives, they might have been friends, they might have been kin, they might have been those. This kind of thing happens so often that it was kind of rare that you would live in a seaport and not know someone or not know of someone who had suffered in a far distant land. So let's move on to our next slide. Okay. And it's with us today. One of the things I'd like to get across today is that these stories were incorporated into American consciousness in a set of scripts. Same kind of characters, different names, but same kind of characters, same kinds of adventures, same kind of daunting challenges over and over again. And we're going to talk about the kinds of daunting challenges they faced in different parts of the world. But these scripts stay with us so that when we hear in the very same place, sorry, where'd you go? I misplaced it. Speaking of places. There. So when we read about Houthi rebels attacking shipping in the very same site, the Red Sea, just off of Yemen, okay, our newspapers tell these stories the way you would have heard these stories in 1806. We're going to talk about how they tell these stories. So, I love this one. I love this painting. This is from Richard Peyton Woodville. Now, it was done in 1848 and it's entitled War News for Mexico from the Mexican-American War. But this gives us an idea of how Americans were connected to Sumatra, to Guangzhou, to Nagasaki, way back when. The first American encounters with the world happened at the moment of the nation's birth. Okay, the peace treaty with Britain that ends the American Revolution, the War for Independence, is signed November 1783. British troops leave at the end of that month. By February of 1784, the first American ship, the Empress of China, sails for Canton. The timing is important. Although our textbooks tend to kind of segregate and compartmentalize Americans' encounters with the world, Americans understood that when they became independent, they stepped onto a world stage. Okay. They hoped it would bring prosperity. They knew it would bring danger. So I love this image because it gives us a sense of how Americans were captivated with and had been captivated by the rest of the world. And this was the world that they knew. And what you notice, if this were one of my classes, I'd stop and say, what do you notice? What we notice here is that we are on the periphery of the world. We're not very important. We're certainly not very powerful. We're not wealthy. The center of the world, the economic engines, the drivers of the world economy, of the global economy, and there was one. There was a global economy, and it grew out of trade with China, and I can't see this clearly, but somewhere over there it is, India. Okay. And ironically, they are becoming the drivers of the world economy today. It's like we're going back a little bit. Okay. This, by the way, is something that most sailors couldn't afford. This cost about $9 in Philadelphia, where it was produced around 1795, 96. The average sailor made about $10 a month, so this would have been too costly for him or for her. So what kind of dangers did Americans encounter? I love this chart. I'm going to show you 3 charts. They all come from the same source. A fellow named Amasa Delano.
1817 in Boston, publishes a book. And it's about his 3 voyages from Boston, voyages round the world, not around the world, voyages round the world is what they like to call these adventures. And Delano, in putting his book together, says, hey, my first voyage around the world was in the ship Massachusetts, sailed out of Boston in 1790. I wonder what happened to my old shipmates. I wonder where they are. So he put together a chart. He looked up his old shipmates, and here's where they are. Now living in the state of Vermont, dead, died at Macau in 1792, died at Canton in 1790, died in England, living on the Penobscot River, which for Delano was as good as being dead. And, you know, well, somebody survives. He's now a slave in Algiers. By the last accounts, died and thrown overboard off Cape Horn, lost overboard off Japan, died on board, and it goes on and on.
Wow.
And on. Okay, something like 78% of the crew had died. Now, he's publishing in 1817, right? The voyage was 1790. So this is a lifetime, because they don't live very long back then. This is a lifetime later. Okay, that's what the China trade was really like. That's how it was experienced. Now we walk past the Gardner Pingree house and we walk past the Derby house and we think that's emblematic of the China trade. And it was for those who stayed at home in Salem, Beverly, Marblehead. But for those who traveled, this was what the experience was like. And so wherever you traveled around the world, French Island, off the Pearl River, you would find tombstones with American names. You might see names of family, and certainly names of friends. Pearl River of Macau, I'm sorry, Pearl River, I should say, from Macau to Canton. There we are. The Protestant cemetery, dedicated in 1821 or 2021. And you'll find the name Kinsman, a Salem name, and a number of other Salem names here. I love this one. In Aceh province, Sumatra. I couldn't get an image of it that really reveals the inscription, but it's dedicated to a Salem man, a Sundahar, which is a kind of chief. And my friends in Sumatra tell me, it doesn't really make sense. Somebody garbled his story. Here's what we know. There's a Salem guy who's buried here. That's it. And wherever you go throughout the world, this is what you see. If you travel to Hawaii, you see Charles Derby's grave. Well, you might not see it because the last time one of my friends tried to find it, it's buried under vegetation and growth, brush. So they had a trouble. They couldn't find it. But that's where Charles Derby was buried. So wherever you go around the world, this is what you will see. So what does that do to American consciousness?
One of your A+ students.
I don't know, it could be a net grad student or assistant professor. The question the book asked was, how did these encounters abroad change us? How did they shape us? Because again, when you pick up a typical American history textbook, high school, college, okay, much of this story is left out. much of the engagement, especially there, you might pick up something that talks about the world, starting with the Spanish-American War of 1898. But these early encounters from 1784, when Virginians and New Yorkers and Carolinians are starting to call themselves by a new name, they're starting to call themselves Americans. And an American consciousness is forming. It's forming partly with these ideas that Americans are in danger. The world is a dangerous place for them, and that's why I call it Eastward of Good Hope, beyond the Cape of Good Hope. Geographically, psychologically, there was danger. Okay. Early America in a dangerous world. Americans, from the moment they leave New York Harbor, the East River, and sail to China, they believe this world is dangerous. And as we saw, the number of dangers, the kinds of dangers were replete. Let's talk about some more. So chapter 1 opens up in Boston. Chapter 2 of the book brings us to the Mediterranean, to the Ottoman Empire. And Americans are very interested in trading in the Mediterranean because it has a host of products and goods that Americans like, currants and raisins and olive oil and all kinds of things. But the Ottoman Empire is supposed to be a place of luxury, rugs and robes and wonderful clothing and such. And they want to come here. Also, it's a short sail. You go, it takes about 6 weeks to sail to Gibraltar, and then another week or two, depending on tides and currents and stuff, to get to Constantinople. So it's a short sail and often a lucrative sail. But you're sailing to a place that Americans have read about. It is a dangerous place. It is a place where the West has been confronted for centuries. This is the land of crusades. This is a land of holy war. This is a land of religious war. And the Americans know they're sailing into a land of what they call Turkish tyranny. They know that this is a land of in which power is held by a few autocrats. The Grand Turk, the great Sultan, his reputation is he is lazy, he is arrogant, he is power hungry, he absorbs all the wealth of the Ottoman Empire from North Africa all the way to Persia. He absorbs all this wealth for his own private uses. He leaves his people writhing in poverty, wrenching poverty, and stultifying ignorance. And you're sailing to a place that is, and again, remember the timing? These people, Salemites want to sail here, but they want to export their ideas, their values. They want to export the American Revolution. They think they're bringing democracy. They think they're bringing Republican ideas, small art. They think they're bringing the fresh air of freedom to a benighted and oppressed people. So in their minds, there's a contestation between what America represents and what the Ottoman Empire, what Turkish tyranny represents. Okay. And it gets worse. There's another kind of danger here. This is an empire that was once resplendent, innovative, powerful, and the life is draining out of this empire as Americans visit. It's in ruins. It's, you may recall the Shelley's poem, we were talking about this a moment ago, Shelley's poem, Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land and so on and so on. And all that's left are ruins and decadence and decay. There's a sense that this is not a healthy atmosphere for Americans. This is not a place where Americans really belong. And even more dangerous, and it sounds a little bizarre today, but the newspapers of this time were filled with rumor and gossip of an impending Ottoman invasion of America. They thought they imagined their own 9/11. They thought they heard stories from European diplomats and others that the Ottomans were intending to invade the United States and bringing this authoritarian, this autocratic culture with them. They were going to do to Boston and Philadelphia what they had done to Damascus. This is the age of the Barbary Wars. As soon as American ships start to sail from Philadelphia and Boston into the Mediterranean, those ships were captured by pirates called corsairs from North Africa, from the North African or Barbary states of Morocco and Algiers and Tunis and Tripoli. Hundreds and hundreds of Americans are captured by the Barbary pirates, and they are held for ransom. They're put to work. They're practically enslaved, okay? And they are writing letters back home. Please, Mom. Please, Pastor Bentley, do what you can to collect money for a ransom. And the churches around here held collections to ransom local people from the Barbary pirates. They wrote to the president, and the problem President Washington faced was we were kind of broke. The country didn't have the money to build ships. It didn't have the money to raise the ransom monies. And so those men lived in these bagnios or Turkish prisons to the end of their days, many of them. We were able to ransom some, but it flew in the face of the idea of American democracy. We like to think that we don't pay tribute. We pay tribute. We pay tribute from the get-go. We did anything we could. In fact, up near where I live in Portsmouth, the shipyards of Portsmouth actually built a ship that was sailed. It was called the Crescent appropriately. It was sailed to Algiers, and it was part of the tribute the Washington administration would send. So you've got this sense that there's opportunity here, but there is tremendous danger. There's awful danger. And we're afraid that the Turkish tyrants might actually launch an invasion and conquer us. The kinds of dangers that you would find in China were different, but they were dangers nonetheless. One of the great dangers in researching this kind of thing is trying to remember where you put your notes. Here we go. Chapter, is that right? Yep. Chapter 3 has us looking at the unfeeling mandarins of Canton and Macau. There you are. And so for Americans, China, like India, was this place of mythical wealth. It was the longest lasting empire the longest running civilization the world had known at that time. And it was a place, as we noted, of porcelains and silks and teas and just wonderful luxury products. And and like the Ottoman Empire, this was an autocracy, a place of millions and millions of people held under the control of a Mongol ruler, an emperor. The Celestial Empire, however, was admired by Americans back then because they were struggling with the whole idea of order. How are we going to weave these 13 states into one different, one unified country? How are we going to weave the culture of Virginia and the culture of the Carolinas into the culture of New Hampshire and the culture of Pennsylvania? Well, the Chinese did it. We should admire that they have overseen 1,000 years of order, 1,000 years of great civilization. And so we sail. It's 1784. We sail to Canton. We sail to China. And nobody died on that first voyage. It was remarkable. It was an unusual voyage in that it was the first time Americans sailed eastward of Good Hope, and it's unusual in that people survived the voyage. Harriet Lowe knew that going to China was a different kind of experience. At 20 years old, she sails just shortly after her birthday, her 20th birthday. She sails to China in the care of her uncle and her aunt. William Henry Lowe, her uncle, doesn't survive. He comes down with something called tropical fever. Rebecca Kinsman has a similar experience. She sails in 1843 with her family. The whole family picks up roots and sails to China. Well, they leave one son behind. And for Rebecca, I think the picture speaks to us. It's a rather poignant study in pain. She loses her 7-year-old daughter. Eka, short for Rebecca, Eka is put on a boat and sent back to Salem at age 7. So imagine the parents saying goodbye to their 7-year-old who is very, very sick. They know she's sick. They don't know how sick. She's dying, and she doesn't survive the voyage back. The next year, husband Nathaniel succumbs to tropical fever too. Okay, so just getting to China or getting back from China is so typical of the kinds of dangers that Americans understood. You would find this in the Ottoman Empire. If the earthquakes didn't kill you, the plague would, or the pirates would capture you. In China, the voyage is so long. This is not a voyage to the Mediterranean. It takes 4 months at least to get to China, 4 months to load your ship up, and another 4 months or more to get back. So this is a big investment of your life. If the average American lived on the eve of the Civil War, the best fed, best taken care of Americans, white men, had an average age of death at 39. Okay. If you're committing a year of your life, that's quite a big deal. And a lot of them did not come back. So you sail to China in hopes of wealth, or at least enough money to come back. And when you come back, most men say, that's it, I'm done, I'm never going to see again. That's enough. You hope to come back with what they call a competency. that is just enough money to buy land, to buy a little farm, maybe in Ohio, because you never want to see the ocean again. There's a guy who sails out of Salem. I love this expression because I love the ocean. I love the ocean the way the French of Provençal love the ocean. They have a saying, praise the sea and stay on land. I love the ocean that way. And you'll find these wonderful ship's logs in which a fellow will write mid-passage, midway on the voyage, he'll write, oh, dear Lord, I look out upon across your vast expanse, and I think how I hate this dirty, no good, plaguey, disgusting, rotten ocean. They really write that. So you come to China, you stop at Macau, and right away you're introduced to another set of customs, another culture that seems to run against the grain of the American Revolution. Remember in our Constitution, Article 8, Article 8 of the US Constitution does something pretty miraculous. It wipes out tariffs at the state lines. Before the Constitution of 1787, Connecticut had tariffs, Massachusetts had tariffs, Rhode Island had tariffs. You couldn't bring goods across state lines without paying a tariff. The Constitution wiped those out. There was a sense of freedom, of political freedom, of economic freedom, of cultural freedom. And there was a sense that we are doing something you won't find anywhere else in the world. When they come to China, the first thing they have to do is stop at Macau, little peninsula, Portuguese colony, in the South China Sea. And they have to stop and get permission to sail up the river. For people who have spent 8 years fighting a war against mercantilism and navigation acts and customs duties, to have to stop and ask permission really sticks in their craw. Okay? And they have to pay a fee. These people become villains in the story of the American encounter. These are the emperor's officials known as mandarins. Right? And they will charge you a fee for every single movement you make. If you sail up so it's about 70 miles upriver. I should have brought a map, I apologize. It's about 70 miles from Macau on the South China Sea up to Canton, what they called Canton, and we call Guangzhou. Okay. Thriving city, 1 million people, a place of great trade, great opportunity. But there are 5 customs sites you have to stop at in that 70-mile voyage. What should have taken you a couple of days trip upriver will take you a week, because you have to stop and get these, they're called chops. You have to get this piece of parchment that gives you permission to sail, and they have to pay another fee. And wherever they go, they have to pay another fee. So there's a danger here. It's not obvious on the surface. It's not the danger of plague or earthquake or pirates. It's the danger that you might be nickeled and dimed to such an extent that the voyage will not make a profit. This is the danger that the merchants, the captains, and then the business agents, called supercargos, because they supervise the cargo, they supervise the trade. They are scared to death that they're going to sail back to Salem or Marblehead or Boston or Philadelphia, and they're going to have to present an account of the voyage, and they're going to have to say, we lost money. After almost a year away, we lost money. Might as well have lost the ship at that point. The fear is the fear of corruption. Corruption so rank, so pervasive, so expensive, that the voyage would be a failure. And so, and the mandarins representing the emperor enact hello you.
She
I think he has a question. Okay, they impose the same kind of tyranny, the same kind of authoritarianism that you see in the Ottoman Empire. Now, there's no gossip, there's no danger that China's going to invade the United States, but still there's that sense, and this is something I've always tried to wrestle with, always try to get my mind around. There's a fear of contagion. What happens if Americans come in contact with this culture? Will we be spoiled? Will we somehow be corrupted? It's a weird kind of thing, but you read about this over and over in the ship's logs and the private letters, the correspondence. You know, there's a sense of it. I'm going to use the language of my daughter here. There's a sense of ickiness. There's a sense that this is a corrupt world, and through contact, we might somehow be tainted through this contact. Let me see. So, and of course, as in the Mediterranean, so too in the South China Sea, there's the danger of pirates. Now, there were in the Mediterranean, among the Barbary pirates, we're talking about maybe 1,000, 2,000 corsairs, 2,000 pirates, maybe a few hundred ships at most. If you think of Pirates of the Caribbean, the great age of piracy in the Caribbean, we're talking about maybe 1,500, 2,000 pirates. In the South China Sea, we're talking about 70,000. There are so many pirates that they're actually organized in fleets. There's the blue fleet, there's the red fleet. There are so many pirates. Let me see if I can find a map. Yeah, so all through this area, pirates infest, that's the word I was looking for. They infest the South China Sea, the waters of the Philippines, off of Vietnam, Cambodia into Malaysia, all through this area. And again, remember timing. At the moment when Americans make their first contact with China, 1780s, 1790s, early 1800s, right up through about 1810, this just happens to be the age of piracy in China, or I should say, let me rephrase, the greatest age of piracy in China. The timing couldn't have been worse for Americans. And so as soon as you, that's it. So you're going to sail along the Indian Ocean. Okay, if you're coming from Salem, that's tends to be the route you take along the Indian Ocean. And as soon as you reach this point, Sumatra, Java, okay, the Straits of Sunda, right here, you get the cannon ready. You fill the muskets with powder. You get your sabers and your swords ready. That is, you do all of that if the ship is owned by a merchant who's willing to spend the money for the muskets and the cannons, but all too often they're not. And so what a wise captain does is he paints along the side of the ship, you paint these white squares, right? And in the middle of the white square, you paint a black circle. so that at a distance, it looks like that's a cannon. They're called Quakers because they don't really fight. True, true. So there's the danger of corruption in China. The danger that there are so many of these fees and regulations in China that the voyage might not even be financially worth it. You've got the danger of pirates. Now, these pirates, this is not Pirates of the Caribbean. The reputation of these pirates is that they are incredibly cruel. There's a sense that they're in it for the money only partly. They seem to take particular pleasure in torturing their captives. And you don't have the conceit of saying, oh, well, they're probably holding me for ransom. They capture everybody they can and they torture everybody they can. So the China trade, from the point of view of an ordinary sailor, is a different kind of thing. I need to check the time. How much time do we have? Oh, we've got time. Okay, good. Let's do one more.
Uh-oh. Wow.
I don't know what just happened.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah, the dangers of the technology. Tim, what did you do?
Come back. What did you
Prayer.
do there? Oh, there we go.
There we go, okay.
All right.
We'll go slower.
Yeah, no, I.
So I'm gonna leave out India, and just say this. India is a place of many faiths, several religions, many religious sects. And like the Ottoman Empire, it's a place of a few extremely wealthy princes and many impoverished peasants. And there's the same sense of, I'll go in this world, I'll try to make some money, but I want to get out of here as quickly as I can because this place is wrong. This place is just wrong for Americans. Okay, let's see. And if you want to know more about India, buy the book. And we're going to end up today with the last region of danger that Americans encounter and write about, the Cannibal Islands. The Cannibal Isles that stretch from the East Indies right up through the Northwest coast. Americans come here. We can see some of the dangers they encounter. These guys, these pit vipers in Africa, they're known as black mambas. They're so venomous, they'll take down an elephant.
Wow.
You sail west around the Cape Horn, Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire. You sail west if you want to get to China, but you want to pick up sealskin or otter pelts. You can do that in the islands of the South Atlantic, South Pacific, and especially along the Northwest coast, what's known as Nuka Sound. Beautiful place. Go if you can. Beautiful spot. But it's in this spot that Americans write about falling prey to treachery. The Indians here, the Native Americans, we call them, the Indians here are known for their treachery. They love to lure a ship into a shoal-strewn cove at night, attacking the crew, falling upon the crew. So Americans will be reading about the ship. You see it here. The massacre of the crew of the ship Tonquin on the Northwest coast. The ship Boston likewise falls prey. This is a place where you can find otter pelts that will sell in China for a great deal of money. But so many ships are attacked and so many crews are massacred here that American consciousness, when Americans think of the Northwest Coast, again, we're talking 1790, 1800, 1810, 1820. So many Americans have heard these stories of bloody massacre that when they think of the Northwest Coast, this is the impression they come away with. The world for Americans in Salem, sitting in a parlor like this, okay, the world is dangerous. Okay, so from the Northwest Coast to the Hawaiian Islands to Sumatra, we sailed to Sumatra for pepper. Pepper is worth more than its weight in gold. And here you see the seal of the city of Salem. The original seal does not feature a witch. It features instead, what do you think you see here?
Mandarin.
Yeah, it looks like me.
Looks like a mandarin, right?
Yeah.
In the foreground, you have a Sumatran Raja, typical Sumatran garb. My friends who teach in Sumatra tell me this is what people wear today. And he's surrounded by pepper plants. He's surrounded by pepper plants, and in the background, it's a Salem ship. For 50 years, so many ships from Salem come to the west coast of Sumatra for pepper that it becomes known as the Salem East Indies. Captain John White of Salem describes the place in this way. They ply the reef-strewn waters of the Central Straits with these proas, these war canoes, they call them proas. They'll have as many as 85 oars. They're filled with men. These formidable and hostile appearances immediately designated them to us as a squadron of piratical proas, which infest more or less all the straits between the Indian and Pacific Oceans and the China Sea. They are always on the watch for small or defenseless vessels, and who, emboldened by some late successes, emboldened also by a lot of opium, have ventured to attack even warships, men of war. And so serious have been their depredations upon the commerce of the East of late years, and so shocking to humanity, their savage cruelty to their prisoners, massacring immediately all the Lascars. The Lascars are indigenous people of the Indian Ocean who served as mariners of native sailors and so on, putting to death with the most lingering and agonizing tortures all the Europeans or whites and so on. So what Captain White is saying, he sails to in 1819 or so, he sails to what we call Vietnam, what he calls Cochin, China, and he encounters these pirates in the waters of the East Indies, and he survives. But he lives to tell the tale. In 1822, he publishes a book, and it's filled with stories of these guys. He was fortunate. Not so fortunate were the crew of the ship Friendship. In February 7th, 1831, the captain, captain goes ashore. He and some of the officers go ashore to barter with the local Raja. They are going to trade, they're going to trade their goods for Sumatran goods. I hesitated because I want to drop this in a moment. And they want pepper. They want to fill the Friendship with pepper. Well, the captain Endicott tells his first mate, be aware of where you are. Do not let any of these Sumatrans on board. Do not let anyone on board at night No one comes on board until I return. Keep your guard up, keep extra men at watch, okay? Keep the ship safe. Well, the first mate is not a man who he's not what you call a serious sailor. He lets some Sumatrans on board at night, and at a concerted signal, they immediately pull out their weapons and massacre what's left of the crew. Looks like this. And they're carrying, these are called cruces, these curved blades, scimitars, and they're laced with poison. So if the initial injury doesn't get you, they're like Komodo dragons. If the initial injury doesn't get you, the poison will. Okay. So much of the crew is taken, is killed, and the ship itself is taken. Fortunately, Endicott and his men on shore get a sense that something's wrong. They don't know what it is exactly, but they know something's wrong. There are canoes around the boat, so they jump in this boat, this whaleboat, and they push it into the water. Just as the Raja's men are about to cut them to pieces, and they row like crazy all night long. They row up the coast. They're exhausted, they're famished, and they come upon 3 other Salem ships. And long story short, the ships return and find the Essex has been partially burned. And Captain Endicott returns to Salem in June, I think it was, of 1831, and reports the loss of the damage to the ship, $40,000, the loss of several crewmen, and so on. I want to end by pointing, we've seen some lovely images, but the image that really we want to pay attention to is something like this. It was the news from the East. Not the events themselves. If we never heard about this, Americans wouldn't have formed much of any kind of impression. It was the news from the East. These representations of plagues and earthquakes and Turkish tyrants, of corrupt mandarins and cruel pirates and so on. It was the news from the East that shaped American consciousness and shaped an American identity. They're left with this. This is a dangerous world. And if we dare to venture out into the world, we must venture with force. The last chapter, From Fear to Force, tells the story of how Americans learned to retaliate. In fact, in the wake of the friendship, the very next year, almost a year to the day, President Andrew Jackson sends a ship out to bombard the Sumatran coast, something we had not really done much of before. The Americans change their attitude toward the world. The world must be ordered. It must be
By us.
Yeah, the world must be ordered by us. And that's the consciousness we have today. It's up to us to bring order into the world, order through force. So that's the book. Thank you.
Well,
Does anyone have any questions? Please.
Now, here in Salem, of course, we have 2, attractions that are dedicated to talking about, the piracy and how the sailors and the merchants, the English sailors and merchants at that time dealt with it. Were the tactics that the American sailors at that time in the 1800s, post-revolution, were the tactics and the methods any different from, pre-revolution, as British colonists to, after the fact? Obviously, we're dealing with different people,
Yeah.
probably bigger vessels, but did the tactics on the piracy side or on the merchant side change at all? Before or after the American Revolution, the golden age of piracy, pre-Revolutionary War, and then of course what the Americans were dealing with on the international stage.
Such a great question. Such a great question. I would say that the big change comes with improved technologies, ironclad ships, and then the use of explosive shells rather than cannonballs. That allows that would allow American ships to fire well out of range of the enemy.
But there are subtle changes, the shift from wooden hulls to copper, hulls. Okay, sheath, thanks, that's the word I'm looking for, copper sheath. The cannon get a little better, but the tactics don't really change. The age of sail is the age of sail. Men and women get better at it, but it remains largely the same. Yeah, please.
Can you remind us a little bit the history about the effort, the first naval efforts against the Barbary pirates and how that came to pass?
Yeah. So the first ship, the Maria out of Philadelphia, is captured in June of 1784. I really, again, want to underscore the timing. Remember, the British don't leave New York until November of 1783. The peace treaty is not signed until November of 1783. And we're starting to, the war is over and we're starting to enter the world. We're starting to step onto the world stage. And right away, the American ship is captured. The crew is captured and held for ransom. The cargo is confiscated. Within a year, 2 more ships are captured. And so the Washington administration, actually, I misspoke, I'm sorry. This is the 1780s. Guess what? There's no such thing as the United States. The United States is an alliance of 13 separate republics, 13 separate countries. Not until New Hampshire ratifies the Constitution in June of 1788 will there be a single country called the United States. Up until that, it's 13 separate and very jealous republics. And so each state must deal with the problem. The Confederation Congress cannot solve the Barbary crisis because if Massachusetts delegates put forth a proposal to build a navy, Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina will say, wait a minute, you want us to tax our citizens to protect your sailors? I don't think so. Even after there's a constitution, even after Washington is inaugurated, April 30th, 1789, not until then could the US actually build a navy if you could get enough votes in Congress. But the same problem applies. Washington can't even get enough votes in the Congress to raise ransom money, much less build a navy. And so throughout the 1790s, the Congress and the country is convulsed with a debate over what do we do. There seems to be virtually nothing we can do except pay tribute. So we are able to raise just enough money, which seems cheaper than building a navy. We can raise just enough money to buy off some of the captives, but not enough. Not until Jefferson becomes president, March of 1801, does he do something about this. And from 1801 to 1805, we're fighting the first Algerian War, the first Barbary War, and we're able to get some peace treaty signed. I love one of these, the Treaty of Tripoli in 1796. This was a tribute treaty. We agree to send arms and such to Algiers. And we even have a provision, the 11th provision of the Treaty of Tripoli, 1796. Again, it's the Washington administration. The United States insists it's not a Christian nation. We are not a Christian nation. We are not founded as a Christian nation. We respect Islam. So that's what the Americans feel they have to do. When Jefferson becomes president, he does something that's really weird for a politician. He does the opposite of what he promises to do. He's been saying, he has Congress build a navy. When he comes in,
the New Englanders have wanted a navy, been crying for a navy, begging for a navy for years. He gets his Republican congressman to support building a navy. So he builds a navy. You see the USS Constitution sailing to the Mediterranean and so on. So you've got that first Algerian, first Barbary War, 1801 to 1805. I don't know, it's very strange the Algerians don't keep their word. You would think they would keep their word, but they don't. So in 1815, 1816, there's a second Barbary War. And that is a series of bombardments of the port of Algiers and the port of Tunis and port of Tripoli. And that pretty much ends the problem. Not completely, but by and large, it ends the problem. That's a thumbnail sketch. I'm sorry.
And the Houthis?
Okay.
Other questions, anyone, Tim?
Well, just an observation,
Yeah.
because I guess what, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah,
And I love the parallel you're making because, now, Britannia used to rule the wave,
Mhm.
but we were that obnoxious child who decided to, maybe we should be ruling the waves, or at least it seems like that's where we've gotten to.
Mhm.
Now, right now, you're talking Somali pirates.
yeah.
Whatever,
Houthis.
who's, the Houthis, who's monitoring all the sea lanes in the world? I mean,
Mhm.
we've got more nuclear aircraft, we have more nuclear aircraft, well, forget it, aircraft carriers, period, than
Yeah.
the rest of the world put together. And, so, but we had a real abhorrence
Mhm.
a historical abhorrence to actually having standing armies and standing navies,
Yeah.
which is, it's not just the cost of these things. We knew what the cost of being under the thumb of either the Turkish, or the European, royal loyalists, right in this house. And that's the reason I bring it up, because there is a strange irony to all of this. That Tim Pickering,
Yeah.
piece of the Constitution over there, he went out and picked the lumber out for several of these ships. Henry Knox was the first guy in charge of as Secretary of War, but it was Pickering who ends up building that fleet. That fleet's used for another purpose, which is well known. We're talking about slavery in the North Africa, but we also had slavery down in Haiti, or
Mhm.
what's now Haiti. And the first successful slave result is a function of Pickering sending down under Talbot up this fleet
Yes.
to cut off the resupply.
Yep.
Again, we've had a lecture here about somebody, and I guess the reason I bring it up is it's sort of, for me, the great tragedy
Uh-huh.
is that everywhere you look, you find this strange guy that grew up in this house connected to all of the events, forgotten in general in history, but most importantly by his own fellow Salemites to
Yeah.
this day,
Yeah.
sadly. Not in his day, but to this day, it has become the case. And it is interesting, sorry, Dane, but I have to mention him. In the course of this talk, if you don't know about Pickering's role in all of this and stopping the Barbary pirates and all this kind of stuff, that made headlines in its day too.
It did.
And it made all kinds of problems. In fact, today, I think I might understand why he actually supported Jackson for the first
For
time.
the first time.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so it's a fascinating, complicated history, and it goes on to this very day. It's really
It is.
amazing.
And again, I want to draw your attention. I can't go back. You can't go back again. Of course, if you turn it on, magic happens. I think the key lies in images like this.
Yeah,
In order to build those aircraft carriers, you have to get the money. In order to get the money, you have to get the votes.
you gotta get the narrative
gotta get-
right.
And
Yeah,
you have to get the narrative. If you read your newspapers, look at the,
yeah.
I forgot to mention, read the New York Times today. They've got two pieces that are spot on for this talk. One is, what is Americans fear?
Yeah,
What is it we fear today? And they have a different interpretation. In the New York Times interpretation, what Americans fear mostly are clowns. We're scared to death of clowns. But but take a look at that, because that question of how do we see the world? And if we see the world through fear, what is it we fear? I've suggested to you what Americans feared in 4 different regions. You know, danger lurked everywhere. Danger took different forms, but danger lurked everywhere, from corruption to massacres. There was always danger somewhere in the world. That's a script that the New York Times is following today that was written back then.
Yeah.
And I really encourage you to think about how these reports are written and how the enemies are described. And you'll find the same language in 1831 that you find in 2024. Okay, take a look at that.
Dane?
Yeah.
Sorry, just one other weird
Yeah.
observation now for our time. So trying to connect dots
Yeah,
is not necessarily easy, even with hindsight. So one of the things we rely on the press
yeah,
and academia is to help us connect these dots so that we understand. And I was reminded today, I'm a globalist. It's absolutely true. I am a globalist because that's where you live.
Yeah.
That's the world's out there. It is, and you're right, you can use propaganda and other mechanisms to
Mhm.
tell stories that are not necessarily accurate, but it's our job, thanks to you and others, to try to sift through this and figure this out so that when we do go cast our votes, which are important in a democracy, maybe we'll be able to deal with whatever the real and imminent threat is now, and if we're smart enough, project out accurately
yeah.
and deal with those threats
And that's,
in order to
My-
protect our own freedom right here, so we can keep casting votes and deciding what we want to do.
this is my conceit. I think history departments are important.
Yeah. Amen.
I think knowing the past, really knowing the past is important. And when we see the demise of the humanities, when we see the demise of civic responsibility, when we see the demise, the loss of newspapers, when we see the loss of humanities departments, we're being deprived of a knowledge that allows us to make informed decisions about the world. I don't care how you vote, but I want you to know what you're voting for.